I usually start off these talks by asking people to raise their hands if they know anything about sailing. How many landlubbers in the room and how many sailors? More than usual. It's had quite a few. I'll try and refrain from too many sailorly jargon, but as John said, it's been a project that I've been doing with 10 years with Mark, who's had at the front here. We started in 2002. Probably because when you work in a company like Airbus, you get to see a very small part of the overall picture, and I was much more interested in seeing the whole process through from an idea on a blank sheet of paper to sailing it. And when I left Cranfield, I picked up a magazine called Boat International, and I read about these boats that combined my two interests. They had wings on them, but they were actually catamarans. And it sort of lay dormant in my mind for many years until early this century when I decided to have a go at it. So I'll tell you a little bit about the event. I think this projector is actually squashing the picture a little bit, so it looks a bit fatter. But the event itself, it was called the Little America's Cup. When I read about it, we're not allowed to call it that anymore for legal reasons. But the Little America's Cup was basically, it started in the same way as the Big America's Cup. Basically a competition between the old world and the new world, America and the UK. In 1851, America came over here, and in the year of Queen Victoria's great exhibition, she had to watch as the Americans sailed around the Isle of Wight faster than any of her boats could do, and they took the cup back to America. That was kind of the start of real international yacht racing. It wasn't long after that that one of the key designers of the America's Cup, he built a boat that had two hulls, and he sailed it down to Newport in Rhode Island, where they kept the America's Cup. And he proceeded to sail rings around all the big yachts, and all these expensive yachts that the rich people like the Vanderbilt, etc., used to own. And basically, they did what anyone would do in that situation. They completely banned catamarans. So it meant that catamaran development really stopped there for pretty much a century. It carried on basically after the Second World War. There was a kind of revival in sailing when materials and stuff from the Second World War, like plywood and glass fibres, etc. They spawned a sort of dinghy sailing activities. So a lot of the dinghies that people are familiar with, like mirrors and albacores, etc., they all started in the 50s. And it was about this time that the catamarans really started to sort of take off again. And I don't suppose you can see it, but this picture here, that is an American boat, and in the late 50s they claimed to have the fastest boat in the world. And the Brits decided that they weren't going to take that line down, so this chap here, his name's John Fisk, he put in a challenge, and so they decided they needed to have some kind of format to actually do the race with. So what they decided to do was say, well, the best thing that we can pick is the America's Cup. We'll pick the 19.5-mile course, we'll make it a match race, which is a 1 versus 1 race, and we'll basically make it like a Little America's Cup. That's how the name came about, and that's how it stuck. So it's never an official name. It used to be called the International C-Class Catamaran Championships, International Catamaran Challenge Trophy. It's changed a few times. And basically we reversed history. We went over to America, and John Fisk and his boat, Hellcat 2, succeeded in beating the Americans quite convincingly. And in true British fashion, he had to sell the boat in America to get his fare back again. So that picture there is him on the Queen Mary on the way back with the trophy. Some of the other pictures there are kind of going through some of the history of the event. I'll probably touch on some of those as we go through, but you can see there's some pictures there like the America's Cup boats, speed sailing boats. They've all kind of generated from the C-Class almost. In fact, in the late 60s, when the Brits were holding the trophy all the time, they claimed to have the fastest boat, and this was disputed, so what they did was they got a car and drove it along the beach at the same speed as a boat, and they said, yes, this is definitely the fastest boat, but everyone disbelieved that, so that's what really kicked off the World Speed Sailing Record Committee. So they set up a committee to validate this, and that came again about through C-Class. Okay, our story, as I say, started in 2002 when we decided to challenge for the 2004 event. But the event had really sort of died since about 1996 because it's a challenge trophy, so therefore whoever wins it has to wait for someone to come and challenge. And the Americans won it off the Australians in 1996. The Australians went off and did speed sailing. The Americans had no one to race, and it was up until 2002 nobody else had entered, so we put a challenge to them. We went to Airbus to get some support from Ian Gray at the time, and fortunately we were lucky enough to get Airbus support, and we built the boat in 2004. We took it out to America, we took it out to Bristol in Rhode Island this time, and unfortunately we came last. So. But it was really quite a challenge. I mean, we built the whole boat in 2 years. We designed it. You can see the picture on the right there. We did a large share of it ourselves in the evenings. We did the design work ourselves, so it wasn't something you do during the day. In that time, we built the largest resin-infused piece of structure that Airbus has built so far. So we were sort of really sort of pushing hard to sort of learn about how to design boats. Apart from this year, prior to this year, the sort of major event that we entered was in 2010, and as I said, in America, when they banned that catamaran in the 1870s, well, this is the club that banned it, and they hadn't seen a catamaran since then, so we were actually quite a historical event. We turned up at this most prestigious yacht club in America, and we were surprised, but they were actually very welcoming, and sort of lost that taintedness of multi-hulls. It's a kind of them and us scenario between multi-hull sailors and monohull sailors. Now this event was really when it started to come of age a little bit. We went out there and we were racing against French, Australian, Canadians, Americans and ourselves. And there were 7 boats lined up to start with, which was a big improvement over 2004 when it was only the Australians, us and the Americans. And it was very much a more noticeable event. In fact, it was so noticeable that the America's Cup people who'd just raced an event earlier in the year in multi-hulls came over and thought, what if we make this a proper multi-hull event? So they were watching what we were doing very carefully. And what they found was that actually multi-hull racing can be exciting, it can be close, and it can be a very technically interesting sort of sport to do. So afterwards they went on and created what we now know as the America's Cup 72 class, and like John said, it all came from that decision in 2002 for us to put that challenge in, reviving the trophy which got the Americans interested, and then we had Ben Aisley sort of famously winning it this year. Okay, I guess a room full of engineers, which I guess we have, going to want to know something about the design of the boats. So these are the basic rules that we have. So it's a very simple set of rules. We've got 25 foot long, 14 foot wide, 300 square foot sail area, and within that you can do anything. You can make it out of Le Mans, you can make it out of whatever you want. You can make it small, you can make it, there are no rules other than those. So it's stayed like that since 1961 when the first event was. The only thing that changed was in 2004 they allowed 2 people to trapeze rather than 1, but the basic boat design has stayed the same. And it's really interesting to see how you can keep the same set of rules, and yet you can see constant improvement. You'd think that it would plateau, but it doesn't. You keep improving all the time. Okay, so I'm not going to go into the big details. Like John said, I'm going to go into hydrodynamics and aerodynamics. I'm not going to confuse you with equations, etc. I'm just going to go through some of the sort of basics of boat design. Now this is what we call a velocity polar, and what you can see there is the wind is coming from the top of the page, and so we have 2 points of sailing. One is where we're sailing into wind, and one is where we're sailing away from the wind. So if you take upwind sailing for a start, you can really see that boats don't sail straight into the wind. There's no way that a boat can sail straight into the wind. So we sail roughly at 45 degrees to the wind when we're going upwind, and when we're sailing downwind, we can sail directly downwind if we want to. Sorry, John.
Okay.
Basically, with C-Class, the key point of sailing is really downwind. When you're sailing upwind, there's much less variables to play with. But when you're sailing downwind, this is actually a polar off a normal yacht. So I'll just show a few quick comparisons. So when you're sailing directly downwind, you can see that you get to this point here, and the thing that counts is the length of the vector that's in the direction that you're going. So you want to go from the top of the page to the bottom of the page. So you can see that the length of that vector, and the black arrow there is less than the blue arrow. Therefore, this boat is quicker sailing directly downwind, and generally speaking, that's just acting with a big blocking sail like a spinnaker or something like that, and you're just blocking the air. Polar or a catamaran, and we can see it's a very different shape. So going upwind again, fairly similar story. But going downwind, if we sail directly downwind with it just blocking, then we go slower than we do if we actually bear off on the winds. And that's typically what we do on most catamarans. You'll jibe downwind rather than taking the direct path. The component that's in the direction that you're actually going is called the velocity made good, and really that's just the component. Okay, so we need to look at the vectors, because in the old days of slow sailing boats, then the wind that you felt over your face was really pretty much where it was coming from. With boats nowadays, it's very different to that. So we're sailing downwind. You've got the wind blowing from the top of the page to the bottom of the page. So this is the true wind velocity. We draw the arrow in the length proportional to the speed of the wind. Now, C-Class catamarans go around about 3 times the speed of the wind. So you can see that if I draw the velocity vector of the boat in that direction, we're tracking downwind. Like I say, this picture's a bit squashed. It should be 45 degrees going downwind. So we've got the velocity of the boat there, and then the apparent wind vector is what you actually feel over the boat. So it feels like it's coming over the front of the boat, despite the fact that the wind is actually coming from behind the boat in the true sense. We orientate that now to something we're familiar with in terms of looking at aerofoils. So we have the apparent wind coming from the right, there's an arrow, so we therefore generate lift at 90 degrees to that, and there's a drag component. We get a result in which basically, if we resolve that into the direction of the boat, gives us the force that drives the boat forwards. We call that thrust. And the force that pushes it over the side is generally the force that capsizes the boat. So we have a kind of natural limiting factor on how much lift we can generate. Now lower down on the wing, the wind is going slower, and therefore it's coming in at a different angle. So we have to look at where we put the area in terms of the height of the wing, etc. Okay. Now, as I said, we're going around about 3 times the speed of the wind, something like that. Well, ice yachts are doing maybe 8 times the speed of the wind. And we can see from ice yachts that they're almost always sailing close forward. We've always got the wing pulled in almost to the centre line of the boat, and that's because of this apparent wind vector is almost always over the bows. It's very narrow range between the port and starboard bows. And that's where we're trying to get to with C-Class at the moment. I just put this diagram in just to show you kind of a 3D visualization. So this here is that's the boat speed vector, so it's constant. That's the wind speed vector, which has got a boundary layer effect. Basically, the wind speed is going slower at the sea level than it is at the top of the mast, and that means that the apparent wind vector has this twist effect. We have to be able to twist our wing to make it work. Now that was something that we featured on our first wing. We tried to put twist into it. It didn't work very well with our first wing. But with our second wing, we made it work rather better. Now the other thing that's sort of come about this year is hydrofoils. Hydrofoils are really the other side of the equation. The wing is all there to give you the power. The foils are there to react that power. You wouldn't go anywhere if you couldn't react that force. It's Newton's, whichever law it is, I can't remember. Traditionally these boats have sort of been displacement craft, so they rack the weight through displacement of the hulls. This year we saw 3 teams with hydrofoils, and they proved to be quite significantly faster than the displacement type boats. And that really changes the sort of paradigm. You can see how much actual boat is in the water. It's very little. Come on to that one next. It changes the paradigm of how we design wings, because this was the design of our wing for this year's boat. And what we've done this year was we've made the flap smaller. Most of the C-Class Catamarans had about 50% chord flap. We changed that, we reduced it down to about 30% chord, because we felt that the faster these boats start to go, the less you need the flaps. And that proved to be the case when we were down in Cornwall. Our wing was performing probably best of all the wings that were down there. So I'm going to try and show you the kind of trend that we're on at the moment. If you look at the true wind vector here and look at the red lines to start with. So this is a relatively slow boat, so you can see 10 knots of wind there, the boat's doing maybe marginally more than 10 knots. The apparent wind is coming from there, which means it's generating lift in this direction. So we generate a lot of lift down there, but that meant that in the early days of the boat design, we were designing with triple slotted flaps and lots of high lift devices just to be able to utilise what is a very short arrow, so therefore it's a low wind speed. We're generating a lot of CL to try and go faster. But as the boats have got lighter and as the aerodynamics have got more refined, then we've gone up to the blue level, and we can see that actually now the lift vector is much more over the side than it is over the front. So we're much more interested in the lift to drag ratio. You can see that this length here is more over the side of the boat, so it doesn't slow the boat down. But as that angle comes round, the drag is really holding us back. By the time we get to the green set of arrows, you can see that actually the drag off the aerofoil is quite a significant effect. But we're not having to generate this much force. So therefore, we're going away from the really high lift coefficient designs that we've seen in the past. We're going for much simpler wings with perhaps no flaps at all. This is really a sort of interpretation of these diagrams. What I've done here is to look at the lift coefficient. Well, the top one shows the lift of the wing and the bottom one shows the lift coefficient, so they're more or less the same thing. But what you can see is at this end of the arrows here is where the red arrows were on the diagram. So this is low-speed boats. Now, as we go this way, we get towards high-speed boats. You can see that in terms of lift coefficient and lift that we can use, the upwind and the downwind. So that's downwind, that's upwind. And you can see at low speeds we needed a lot of lift and needed a lot of lift coefficient. But as the boats start going faster and faster relative to the wind, then the upwind requirements and the downwind requirements start to come to be about the same. So again, why are we designing boats with flaps? There is no real reason to, and of course what we're trying to do here is leap to the next, rather than doing an evolutionary thing. What we're trying to think is if we can leap to the next paradigm and design wings that are simpler, with less twist, with less flaps and less high lift, then everything starts to work in your favour. Okay. And I'm not going to talk all about the technical stuff. I wanted to talk a little bit about our story about how we got there this year. We are a small team. We're a volunteer team. So we have to rely on favours and a kind of artful, dodgy way of getting things done. And because we didn't have much money, what we ended up doing was some design work for other teams. And in return, they going to design some components for us. So we built the wing, and theirs was to design the flaps. Unfortunately, that's kind of what we got as our flaps. We ended up 2 weeks before the event with what really was a pile of rubbish, really. And we were really sort of put in a horrible situation. That's a photograph of us. We saw the flaps, kind of really thought the world was falling in upon us. You can see me there, I'm not looking very happy. And so we went around to the Nova Scotia, and Paul Larson there, he's the fastest sailor in the world on a sail rocket. He came around just on that same day, and we were all just incredulous about what happened, and we pretty much thought it was the end of our event. But Paul's a great motivator, and he made us believe that actually we could possibly do something. So you can see Helen on the phone there. She's phoning up people to see what they can do. She's phoning up the National Composite Centre. We've got Sticky there, who's independent composites down in the docks. And we really thought, it's just about doable. We've got 2 weeks before the start of the event. We've got to make two flaps. Can we do it? And we came out of that meeting with a lot of energy and a lot of belief in what we could do. So what we got done was we built some tooling. We got some MDF, took it to the National Composite Centre, and they machined the lower flap. Independent Composites did the upper flap, and we started both flaps going in parallel. So you can see that's the Composite Centre. We started to lay up into the flaps, into the flap hooks. We started on the leading edge, basically using hot wired foam and laying carbon over that. And gradually we sort of started to bring it all together. I won't go into the sort of details of the manufacturing processes, but we tried to sort of do it in a very slick way. We tried to make it in as few parts as possible. So this is in really 3 parts. The whole flap is in 3 parts. We've got an upper skin, a lower skin, and a spar. And the ribs are so lightly loaded that we really the only thing we needed to do was put holes into the structure, and that left the ribs effectively. That's Helen shaping the wingtip, doing trial fitting. So we got the flap together and putting it all together. And by day 13, this is including making the tooling, we had all the major parts of the boat made. And that was really our cue to take the boat down to Cornwall, where the event was going to be held. Unfortunately, our trailer ended up parked behind 50 grommets in Ireland. So we seemed like everything that could go wrong with our project seemed to be going wrong. But needless to say, Airbus managed to get it out there pretty quickly, so it didn't really hold us up. So we got the wing into the trailer and took it down to a cowshed in Cornwall with 4 days to launch. Now, it may seem like we had a wing that was almost ready, but it was a long way from being ready. It had all the flap attachments, it had control mechanisms and the mast foot, and everything still needed to go onto it. So we basically spent the next 4 days, more or less, from waking up in the morning to going to bed at night, working on this. And we can see there's guys covering the wing there, Hugh doing his James Herrick impression, and then by about the 3rd day we were ready to get the shroud lengths correct. So we raised the front part of the wing, then 1 more night's work, and then we were ready, took it out. And this was the day before. This was the Friday, and the racing was due to start on Sunday. So we had a requirement from our sponsors, the ADS, to say we've got to have a photograph of this boat by 4 o'clock on Friday, because we're launching a new website. This boat is a central part of that website. We can't fail. We've got a lot of pressure from them. So basically there we are. It's about 3 o'clock in the afternoon there. Still applying all the stickers, the Airbus sticker and the Invictus stickers, etc. Raising the rig, and then 3:30, there we are, just going into the water. So Helena, one of the team members, she took some pictures, emailed them off to EADS, and it was on the EADS website the next day. And that was us. Basically, we were in the water, couldn't believe it. We didn't go sailing that day because there was still quite a lot of stuff in terms of control mechanisms to do, but we gave ourselves a little reward. We took ourselves down to the pub and had a well-earned pint. But that wasn't the end of the day. Later on in the evening, after we came back from the pub, we went into the sheds again, and we had to get our boat measured, because you have to measure these wings to make sure that they are properly C-class and not more than 300 square feet.
Can I ask, what's the material of the wing skin?
It's kind of shrink wrap stuff that you put your food in, you wrap your food in. It's called Glysar. It's basically heat shrink film. That's us the next day.
Thank you.
It's first trial, and generally speaking, when we put a boat in the water, we like it to be at least 6 months before the race, and not like 24 hours or whatever it was. And we were expecting a lot of problems. We took it out on the first day, and pretty much the only problem was this flap mechanism here. We had a system where the wing has to go symmetrically from one side to the next. And we had this track system which it was designed to sort of flop around. And what was happening was it was moving at the bottom, but it wasn't moving at the top. So we ended up with a flap on the wrong side of the wing on one of the tacks. Now that's not great for performance, but again, another night in the workshops, and by the next day we got it sorted. So there we are, day one. First time our boat was really going to be raced, and it was another quite historic occasion actually. This was down in Mile End, Cornwall, so a little muddy field in the middle of nowhere basically. We had 11 of the world's fastest boats gathered there. They came from Switzerland, they came from France, they came from America, Canada. We had some Italians intended to come, but they didn't. The Portuguese were there. Basically, this is the first time we've ever seen 11 C-Class Catamarans gathered in anywhere, basically, even in the heyday of the class. The first race, it was a real shame, but typical Cornish weather. It's sunny one minute and pea soup the next. And we started the race, we could just about see the top mark, but unfortunately, by the time the boats were starting to get close to it, the fog got closer, which is a real shame, because when we looked at the GPS, we were actually in the lead coming up to that first mark. It was unfortunate, but we'll see on a bit of video in a minute how that panned out. Day two was rather less successful for us. That's us in the bottom left there. On the way out to the race, we had a capsize. It was a little bit of an unknown cause when we first looked at it, but when you look at the video, you can see the wing started to sort of flap around, and then what happened was the flap went onto the wrong side, and that basically acted as a servo tab, like a servo tab aileron, and what it did was it cranked on the angle of attack of the wing, which meant that we were generating more and more lift, and we couldn't do anything about it, because it's very difficult to push with rope. So what ended up happening was we capsized the boat. We thought we had no damage, but actually it turned out when we got back to the beach, we found the front crossbeam, the one that's vertical in that picture there, was snapped. We were lucky that it didn't snap in the middle of the water, and everything floats off in different directions. But we therefore made 2 days, or lost 2 days of sailing, because we had to do a repair on that. I have to say that the Portuguese also snapped their beam on the first day of racing, and they gave up. They stopped there. They said, no, that's too much damage. We weren't going to give up like that. It was our event. We were hosting it. We couldn't really not be there. So Mark drove all the way back up to Bristol and got a carbon tube, and we basically rebuilt the front beam. Okay, some more shots of the racing. You can see from the top middle picture there that we weren't the only ones to have capsizes, so there were a few boats that went over. Generally speaking, we fared, apart from the cross beam, we fared better than most every time everyone else's wing went over. They did quite a lot of damage to the wing. Our wing seemed to survive intact. So basically, overall, it was a fantastic event, and we had world's top sailors there. We had Frank Camus, who's a renowned French around the world sailor. He sailed and won many events. We've had America's Cup sailors, so we've had America's Cup helmsmen sailing in these events. A lot of the designers worked on the America's Cup teams. There's Fred Eaton in the picture there. His team worked on the BMW Oracle team. The people from the Swedish teams. There's a huge number of design talent there, and we had design seminars. We had live broadcast. It was a major event, and really it was quite a success. It was a huge amount of work for us, Mark and myself in particular. But it was an amazing experience, I have to say. So I'll show you a video now, and this will give you some idea of what these boats actually look like when they're moving along.
And this is Team Cascai. Unfortunately, brand new boat, never tested, never sailed here or anywhere, and unfortunately they broke their front beam on the way up to the race course. As we can see, this makes it pretty terminal for these guys. They're not going to compete the rest of the event. But having spoken to the guys, you know, they're super keen in terms of they want to get this thing fixed. They want to be there for the next cup.
Back with you folks from the waters here of Boundless Bay, beautiful.
So you can see when they're actually moving along that they're not producing very much in the way of a wake at all. Usually with a boat, the amount of waves they produce, that's absorbing energy. So if you can have a boat that produces no waves, then that is an indication that it's not really got much gas. That's our first day of racing, as I say. People trying to find the top mark. Everyone looking a bit confused.
Sailing in the fog, trying to find the mark, and we lined a bunch of boats up. There's a search for it. For sure, we're all watching each other, you know, and spacing it right on the line of visibility, but we couldn't find it, so that was the end of that. But it was fun.
You know, we were watching you one of the boats foiling in one of the new boats for 2013 for this World Cup.
Not great start for me. I was a little bit late. Otherwise, we did a good angle, yeah, not so bad.
Tomorrow, the forecast is for 15 to 25.
We've got a woman from one of the Canadian teams.
That's Helen, one of our team.
American coach? American coach was that. I don't really know. All I know is I'm supporting him if it goes over.
See a picture of our capsize at the moment. There we go. What we think happened was when he fell off the bows there, he landed on the forestay. The forestay put a great big jolt into the front beam, and that's what snapped it. You can actually see the beam snap before the wing hits the water.
It was a very windy day. For the first day of race, it's not easy to start with wind and with the choppy sea.
Launch to the capital L, people! I've got a bit more surface there on the bottom of my shoes than they had falls in the water there. It's okay,
Wild? Out of control.
Out of control, yeah, for sure.
Since 31 feet, I said, wow, okay, oh my god. Okay, perfect.
Gives you an idea of the scale of the boat as well.
Our boats can be very fast, but they need a lot of attention. And at one moment there's no attention, carrying into some drama. There was one moment where I lost the rudder, and it was very quickly over. The boat wanted to go one direction, which I didn't want to do. The unfortunate happened, and I already saw the wing come over us, and I was like, oh.
See the damage. That was Misha Heemskerk. He's the world champion on F-18 catamarans, probably the top guy in small catamaran. Zoom it forward a little bit. There's a few bits of interviews and stuff. This video is actually available on on Vimeo and YouTube. So conscious that we've got a limited amount of time, so I don't want to go on too long. But I wanted to talk about sponsorship because we're right next door to Airbus, our key sponsor, and sponsorship has been perhaps harder for us than the engineering. The engineering was actually the easy bit. We really struggled on sponsorship. The French that you saw there, they had a budget of, we haven't heard an exact figure, but it's certainly in excess of €1 million, possibly €2 million it was for their campaign. I think the Canadians have spent something similar. The Hydros team also spent somewhere around about that. When you think that we did our campaign for £40,000, it kind of puts it into comparison that we were really underdogs. And we did struggle with sponsorship. We really did need more money, but the point is that you can't expect people to give you money for nothing. Now, sponsors normally want something like publicity, and this is some publicity that we gathered a little while ago. So we certainly do attract a fair amount of interest, and probably more than most. But you can see in the world of sport, it's football, Formula One. These are the really big sports, and sailing is just a niche sport. And within that niche sport, we've got things like America's Cup, Volvo Ocean Race, and Extreme 40. So when you come down to us, C-Class Catamarans, we're really a niche of a niche. And trying to actually get people to give you millions of pounds based on what is such a small spectator sport is a big ask, really. And I think it's something that a lot of teams will struggle with, the fact that there were teams there that had multi-million-pound budgets. Well, one was the richest guy in Canada. He was one of the competitors. The other one was sponsored by a bank, and Groupama sponsored Frank Hammers to do all sorts of other things. So it's just a small part of this. And Hydros are a research organisation backed by a Swiss bank. So, everyone else there really either have their own money or found other ways. So everyone really does struggle with sponsorship unless you happen to be in a lucky situation. So we know lots of other teams that wanted to come to the event that didn't really. So what can we offer that isn't really based on cash? And in this way, Airbus was really our ideal sponsor, because most of the team worked there, or used to work there, and it was really that angle that we tried to play. When we went to see Ian Gray, first of all, it was very much about what we could do for Airbus internally rather than publicity. We can generate a reasonable amount of publicity, but it's not really the thing that Airbus is interested in. We don't sell to the public, therefore, you should advertise in Airbus. So over the years, we've done our utmost really to try and demonstrate that there is value in what we do and what we've given back to Airbus. So we have mentored a number of students over time, and they've come from Cranfield, they've come from Southampton, Sheffield, Manchester, Bristol and Bath. They've come from all over the places, and we've supported in their studies, and they've chosen C-Class as their big topic, and we've helped them along in that direction. We've looked at new manufacturing methods. As I said before, we did the largest resin-infused structure in Airbus, and Airbus has always been looking at advanced tape laying of pre-preg materials. Well, this is very much a low-cost way of doing things, but Airbus never really looked into it in that kind of scale. And so we invited people down and gave a manufacturing demonstration. We've put ideas into Airbus, into the Technology Strategy Board, and we've won multi-million-pound research grants on the strength of those. For the people in the team, they've had an experience where, if I'm a stressman, I've learned about composite manufacture, or the composite manufacturing people have learned about CAD design. It's a great way to transfer learning across different disciplines. We try to develop new ways of working and trying to understand things like motivation. We've fed into Airbus's motivation initiatives. We've been the first load-bearing additive layer manufacturing application, where we took some titanium mouse hook fittings. That's a picture of it in the top left there. And that was where all the load went through on our boat. And until that point, titanium had never actually been used in anger on any particular product. And of course, like John said, we've consulted on the formation of the innovation cell as well. So we really try and find every opportunity that we can to basically pay our way, as it were. We don't expect money for nothing. And if we can carry on that way, in fact, we've really only scratched the surface. It's very difficult with a large organisation to try and get the message across. You've got to get it to the right pace, at the right time, and therefore you've got to know how the organisation works, and Airbus is not really geared up to a sponsorship environment. It sponsors things like charities and things like that, but it doesn't have a mechanism in its organisation to say, what can we do here? Because if you go to a lot of other organisations, they're very switched on with sponsorship, and they're actually an active partner in that. With Airbus, it was less so. EADS, on the other hand, they were more interested in the publicity side of things. So they were actually very hands-on. They actually paid for our website development, and they paid for a lot of other things that we did. They actually paid for the tracking, the GPS tracking of the event too. So we feel that it's got a lot further to go in terms of what we can do and what we can give. Zooming in there. Another thing that we're trying to sort of push towards, or the message that we're trying to convey is that actually I feel that we've done a lot of innovative things with the boat project, and innovation is one of the key objectives of Airbus and the ADF, one of their key drivers. The thing that drives the innovation in the class, in the C-Class, is the fact that it is a competition. The fact that you're actually going out there and every 2 or 3 years you're measuring your performance against the best of other people. And historically that is a phenomenal accelerator in terms of development. Obviously, wars are the ultimate competition, but we can see pictures there of speed-turning boats. We can see the Schneider Trophy, which really accelerated aircraft development, the Kramer Prize, the X Prize, the Daily Mail prizes, etc. And these are fantastic catalysts for actually developing ideas and innovations, and it's probably what we nowadays call crowdsourcing. So what we've been trying to do is trying to push some ideas like this into Airbus and see whether we can actually get some competition going. And there's now a French team that's interested in doing C-Class Catamarans, and we've been talking with them to see whether we can actually do a friendly competition, so we actually compete against each other, but we share. And in this way we're also exploring the different kinds of intellectual property laws that you can get. So in the oil industry, for instance, there's certain areas where they'll collaborate, certain areas where they'll compete fiercely, and we want to try and see how those kind of rules can work. So everything that we do is really a kind of a learning exercise, and that's really what keeps it sort of interesting for us. I'm going to wind up now to say where next. Well, we're actually going to Geneva. This is a video produced by the Swiss, and it's going to be a very different affair. It's going to be a very high prestige event, home of the previous America's Cup, and don't know what's going on there. It's basically the home of the Alinghi team from the America's Cup.
Innovation, technology, energy, and fashion. Welcome to the C-Class.
So this is going to be sponsored by a big Swiss bank. Lombard Odier is going to be sponsoring it, and they're putting in 10 times the amount of money into the event that we spent on our event this year.
Some of the most exciting racing today, anyway.
So that's what we're aiming for. We're aiming for doing our next design, which we think is going to be quite radical, the next one. I can't give away too many secrets at the moment, but it's quite a large step from where we were last time, and we've got 2 years to do it. It's going to be in September in 2015. So we need to get our thinking caps on, we need to get some money. And I think that's probably about that's it. So,
thank you, Norman. Thank you very much. Now, I'm sure Norman will accept questions, so if you'd like to ask a question, but do be sure everybody can hear your question.
With regard to the wing, is that a combined mast and sail? And is the primary load-bearing structure of the wing the carbon fibre mast?
Yes. I expect that there's back quite a few pictures. There we go. That's a picture of our mast. We did originally intend to have around masters, we can actually twist the wing around it. But it was sort of halfway through the design evolution that we're working out that actually the faster you sail, the amount you actually have to twist it gets less and less. So we took I guess a pragmatic decision that it saved time, it saved money, it saved effort, it saved weight. So we took the twist out altogether. And we were slightly unsure about how much difference that would make. But in the end, we were the fastest non-foiled boat upwind, and we were about the same as other boats going downwind. So we haven't lost anything through having a smaller flap, but we gained by having a cleaner wing going upwind. So you're right, this is basically the structural element.
Yeah.
And what we did was we basically had a load of ribs with support around there, and occasional strong ribs to support the flap off. Everything in between is really non-structural.
And the heat shrink skin
That's totally
forms the
non-structural.
actual sail.
Yeah, it's the skin really. It's
Okay.
more analogous to like a personal bike lane or something like that, where you can stretch fabric and stuff.
And what are the materials of construction of the hulls?
That's all carbon fibre.
That's all carbon, is it? You don't have any Kevlar combined with it to improve crashworthiness?
Crashworthiness isn't really a design consideration for these boats. If we have to start putting extra material in or something that adds weight.
Sorry, third point, you haven't mentioned the speed that these boats achieve.
Okay, that's a good point. For foiling boats, the top speed was somewhere, we reckon, around about 32 knots, something like that, which is pretty fast for a racing boat. It's designed to go upwind and downwind. The speed record sat at 36 knots for many, many years, and that was an out-and-out one-tack designed boat that was meant to just do speed. These boats are doing it on a regular basis.
Oh, thank you.
What was your dimensions of weight?
All up weight, the all up weight of our boat we think was about 190 kilos. That's about the same weight as the two people that sat on it. That is probably a bit too heavy. We're looking to halve the weight of that for our next boat. And I think we can do it.
Is there a limit of the wind speed?
There is a limit of the wind speed, it's 20 knots of wind. That's nominal, but what happened in 2010 when we were in Newport in America was that we had 30 knots of wind on the first day, we had 28 knots of wind on the second day. On the third day we had about 24 knots, and we thought, we've only got a week's racing, we've got to do something, and so we went out on 24 knots of wind. 6 boats went out and 3 boats came back. So it's a bit of a killer, strong winds. Fortunately our boat was one of the 3, so but yeah, it meant that that's another thing about these boats is you have to design them so that they're terrible, and generally what happens is the boats get damaged overnight and people spend the night in the workshops, usually all night, and then next day they're out racing again.
When the design of the next American Cup was announced, could your boat be scaled up to fit, maybe?
Yeah, I've given quite a lot of thought to the differences between America's Cup and ours. The geometric ratios are slightly different, but essentially they are almost similar in all their principles. And I think whatever would apply to ours, the sort of trends and principles apply to those boats as well. I'm not quite sure whether the America's Cup's going to stay with Catamaran, but certainly if it does, then I think America's Cup teams could probably learn quite a lot. I think Frank Hammers, who was the winner of this year's event, his ambition is to go on to America's Cup for the next one.
You talk quite a lot about the stats, but there's foil under the set. Some boats falling in this year. When you discussed the rules, there weren't any rules around foils. Just wondering, are there any rules around the number of foils that are allowed access control?
You're allowed active control. It's basically the rules that we saw on the first page there. So you can have active control. There are general rules of sailing which say that you can't use stored energy devices. So if you've got things like batteries or hydraulics or something powering your control system, that's not allowed. But if you're manually pumping it up and down or doing whatever it is, you can do that.
There's no limitations on the number of spots.
No, you can have as many or as few as you want. The rules do state that it's got to be a catamaran, so it's got to have 2 hulls, and I think they have to be symmetrical about the boat center. That's probably about it.
How gymnastic does the crew have to be?
Pretty active, I think. It's a shame he's not here, but Cedric works with Airbus, and he can probably give you a more first-hand idea of how athletic you have to be. But I think it's not just in terms of boat handling, it's also, if you do it too slowly, then you're just losing too much time. And the tacks and drives are really where you can lose a lot of time. If you, particularly tacks, sometimes, if you don't come through the wind properly, then you end up head to wind and you can't do anything, you're stuck there, and you can lose huge numbers of boat lengths by doing that. And it has happened. We've also, on the last race that we entered, we misjudged the ley line, the point where you got to turn to head to the mark. We turned too soon, which meant that we had to put another couple of drives in, and by doing that, we lost probably nearly a minute by doing that. We made that back up because our boat had good speed. But yeah, you've got to be athletic, and control and tacking is a key part of the design of that.
How important are the control systems with having? There's a lot in the
Yeah.
growing in this class as well.
I think this class it shies away from anything that's too regulatory. I think we try not to bring in too many regulations. That's part of what I like about the class. So there have been some queries about foils. People need clarification of the rules, and people have asked about control systems, etc. And I think still stepping back to say that the only rules are no stored energy, and you've got to stay within the 14 feet wide, so you can't put a big T-foil underneath the hulls, because that would bring them outside. So really it is just that, and if you can come up with ideas of how to do something interesting with that, which we think we've done, then that's what the game's about. It's that innovation thing. You've got to think. We've got a box rule, but using that phrase, you've got to think outside that box a little bit.
You're probably sick of hearing America's Cup, but the America's Cup was jibs, and there weren't any jibs on your boat. Is there a reason for that? I know there's
it's rules, really. It's America's Cup allowed extra sail area that we aren't allowed. We're allowed 300 square feet. So if I could have a jib if I wanted to, and the early boats did have jibs, they'd have to take area out of this to do so.
And that's more efficient, is it, to have a single wing rather than...
Yeah, in the early days of the boats, they started off with 2 sails, a jib and a mainsail, and then very quickly they changed to just 1 sail. Even though it's a soft sail, it's still more efficient than having a jib. And then they made a sort of big teardrop-shaped mast, and that grew, and eventually it's you can see an evolutionary chain to get to this point. But even with the America's Cup boats, actually, what they were finding was with jibs, etc., because they were fairly closer to the wind than they even thought. Going downwind, they expected to be using what they call code zeros, kind of a bit like spinnakers, but asymmetric spinnakers. And they found that they couldn't even use those because actually the wind was so far around the front, and it was blowing around the wrong side of the sail. So they didn't use them on most of the occasions that you can think of. I think it was only the very light winds where area counts, and that's the only time they used them.
One more then?
Does the design in itself like put more than doing testing in a wind tunnel?
One problem with the wind tunnel is you can't get that twist of the apparent wind. But it's a good question. We've toyed with the idea of using CFD and wind tunnels, etc. It's part of the challenge of the design is having so many variables. I mean, we can make the wing span whatever we want. They're typically about 13 meters, but in 2010 they came up with a taller wing, which did better than everyone else. We can change where we put the area, so we can put all the area at the bottom, or we can put all the area at the top. we can change the flap chord ratio, and so there's a lot of variables, which means that you've got to have something pretty lightweight to do your analysis with. You could probably use something like wind tunnels or CFD as a validation tool, but like I say, we're a very sort of budget team, so we haven't done that so far. It's about what I'm going to get out of it, and I haven't been convinced about what that would be yet. So, but, yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So that's our interest in catamarans. We'd all like to thank you very much indeed for coming along tonight. See you again sometime. And the Society would like to wish everybody a happy Christmas